Theodore Robert Cowell was born on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont, in a home for unwed mothers. His mother was Eleanor Louise Cowell. She came from a respectable family, though her son was born out of wedlock. Information about the father of the future serial killer varies. According to some sources, Louise conceived the child with a sailor. Others claim she had a sexual relationship with her own father, Theodore's grandfather. This has never been confirmed or disproved. The only official record remains Ted Bundy's birth certificate, which lists a certain Lloyd Marshall as the father. In the mid-20th century, the United States was a far more puritanical country than it is today, and giving birth to an illegitimate child was strongly condemned by society. The first years of little Teddy's life were spent in the home of his grandparents, Eleanor and Samuel Cowell. To avoid social disgrace, they pretended that Ted was their own son. Ted's grandfather was known for his violent temper. He was a domestic tyrant who hated people of color, Jews, and Catholics. Samuel often physically abused his wife and children, though Ted remembered him fondly. His grandfather became furious whenever anyone mentioned Ted's parentage. His grandmother, by contrast, was quiet and submissive, prone to deep depression, and so fearful in old age that she was afraid to leave the house. Ted lived with his older sister, Julia, who was in fact his aunt, Louise's younger sister. One night, Julia awoke to find herself surrounded by kitchen knives. Standing beside the bed, smiling, was 3-year-old Ted. Constant domestic strife eventually pushed Louise to leave her parents' home. She and little Ted moved to Tacoma, Washington, to live with relatives. There, Louise began attending Methodist church meetings, where she met Johnny Culpepper Bundy, a hospital cook. After a year of dating, she married him. Johnny adopted Ted and gave him his surname. During the 1968 presidential campaign, Bundy volunteered for Nelson Rockefeller's campaign, one of the Republican candidates. Ted even traveled to Florida for the Republican National Convention, though the party ultimately nominated Richard Nixon. After the election, Ted began traveling across the country, staying with relatives in different states. He briefly studied at Temple University in Philadelphia, before returning to Seattle, where he enrolled at the University of Washington to study psychology. His varied education allowed him to work at a Seattle crisis center, where he answered suicide hotline calls. By 1972, Ted Bundy had graduated with a degree in psychology and began working in the governor's office, helping with a re-election campaign and gathering intelligence on political opponents. In late 1973, he entered law school at the University of Puget Sound, and a year later transferred to the University of Utah. Up to this point, nothing in Bundy's life hinted at the monster he would become. By the time he entered law school, he seemed to have turned his life around. In November 1973, he was 27 years old, educated and sociable. Yet something dark was already growing inside him. Psychological evaluations never found him insane. He was always declared mentally competent. No one knows exactly when or why he began killing. Many believe such behavior stems from frustration or loneliness, but Bundy was intelligent, popular, and had no shortage of romantic relationships. According to his own later statements, his crimes were about power, total control over his victims. He said that by killing, raping, and desecrating their bodies, he felt united with them, as though they became a part of him. After their deaths, Bundy often returned to the corpses, washing their hair, applying makeup, even painting their lips and nails. In his mind, he could make them look any way he wanted. Reliable data about where and when Bundy's killing began or how many victims he had does not exist. He gave different numbers to journalists and lawyers. Some claimed his first murder happened when he was just 15. Officially, his first known attack occurred in early 1974, when he broke into the room of University of Washington student Karen Sparks. While she slept, Bundy struck her on the head, knocking her unconscious, then raped her. Sparks survived, but suffered permanent brain damage and memory loss. A month later, Bundy struck again, another female student, another brutal assault. Soon, disappearances of young women became a monthly occurrence across Washington state. Witnesses described a handsome man with a cast on his arm, driving a Volkswagen Beetle. By spring 1974, similar attacks began in neighboring Oregon. Bundy charmed his victims, lured them into his car, and murdered them. By mid-year, about 10 women were missing. Under public pressure, police refused to share details to avoid tipping off the killer. Ironically, Bundy was then working for a government emergency agency, sometimes even helping in the search for the very victims he had killed. In July 1974, he abducted 2 women from a crowded lake beach near Seattle within hours of each other. Both were raped and murdered. Witnesses again saw a charming man in a cast driving a Volkswagen Beetle. The police were desperate but still had no solid leads. By late 1974, Bundy had moved to Utah for law school but struggled academically. Frustrated, he resumed killing. In September, he abducted a hitchhiker from Idaho, then 16-year-old Nancy Wilcox, and later the daughter of a police chief who was found raped and tortured after being held captive for a week. In November, Bundy made a crucial mistake. Pretending to be a police officer, he lured 18-year-old Carol DeRanch into his car. Sensing danger, she escaped and later became a key witness at his trial. That same night, he kidnapped another girl who was never found. His girlfriend, Elizabeth Klopfer, twice called the police with her suspicions about Bundy, but officers dismissed them. In 1975, Bundy began killing in Colorado. His known victims included nurse Karen Campbell, ski instructor Julie Cunningham, and several others, including 12-year-old Lynette Culver. His last known confession was to the murder of 15-year-old Susan Curtis in June 1975, though most bodies were never recovered. Police in Seattle had long circulated Bundy's sketch, and several people had identified him, but authorities ignored the leads. In August 1975, Bundy was finally arrested after refusing to stop for police. His car contained burglary tools, and it matched the description from the DeRanch case. DeRanch identified him as her attacker, leading to his conviction for attempted kidnapping in 1976. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison, but soon faced new charges for Karen Campbell's murder in Colorado. Representing himself in court, he was granted access to legal materials and used the opportunity to jump out of a second-story window during a recess. He was recaptured a week later. Months later, Bundy again escaped, this time through a hole in the ceiling of his cell. Wearing stolen clothes, he simply walked out of the jail and wasn't minced for nearly a day. He fled to Florida, where he resumed killing. In January 1978, he broke into a Florida State University sorority house, killing multiple students in a single night. He struck again soon after. Only 1 woman survived. In February, he was stopped by a police officer and finally arrested. Bundy was charged with the Florida murders. Prosecutors offered to spare him from the death penalty in exchange for a full confession, but he refused. The jury found him guilty of multiple murders, assaults, and thefts, sentencing him to death. While awaiting execution, Bundy gave interviews to biographers, often speaking about his crimes in the third person to avoid additional charges. He confessed to 31 murders, though experts believe the true number exceeded 100. His execution was delayed by numerous appeals, but Florida's governor refused any further stays. On January 24, 1899, after more than a decade on death row, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair. Outside the prison, more than 2,000 people gathered, celebrating his death as if at a festival.